Good afternoon. Welcome to Lunch with Books live stream, our Christmas special edition. I will introduce our guests in just a moment. First, I'd like to remind you that next week on the 29th at noon, we will have Rosemary Hathaway from WVU, who has written a book for WVU Press called Mountaineers Are Always Free, which explores the iconic West Virginia uh, figure, the mountaineer, and all of its meaning. This week, as I mentioned, we have for you a very special Christmas edition of Lunch with Books live stream featuring our friend Don Feenerty. Don lives on a farm in Ohio, and I've watched his videos for quite a while now. I'm always fascinated by the things he's able to do. He is a Renaissance man, but he says he has a simple life. Now, life on a farm can look very romantic. It's very appealing because it's not something that I ever did. And I think you'll see some of that today. But he, again, claims to be a simple man. And he started his own YouTube channel called The Simple Life with Don Feenerty. But he is from South Wheeling originally. And he's going to tell you about some books that changed his life. I'll let him tell you that. And meanwhile, I'm going to tell you that he has made hand-carved a door knocker, a woodpecker. It's pretty cool, and you have a chance to win this. All you have to do is like our video, or make a comment, or hopefully ask a question. And you can do that by typing in the comments field during the program, and we'll get to those at the end. Don will come on live to answer your questions. So without further delay, I'm going to start the program today, A Simple Life Christmas special with Don Feenerty. Stand by.
Hello and welcome to the Ohio County Public Library's Lunch with Books series. I'm Don Feenerty, and this is The Simple Life, a Foxfire Christmas from the Meeting House in historic Mount Pleasant, Ohio. Now we're here in the historic Meeting House in Mount Pleasant. This building was built in 1814. It was built as a meeting house for the Quakers, and this place was designed to hold 2,000 people. And something that's just absolutely amazing about this space is it was designed in such a way that when it had 2,000 people in it, it was designed so that anyone could speak at any part inside this building and everyone else would hear it. Now, I've only been in one other are, and you're going to see how great the acoustics are here too. When I was first asked to do this Lunch with Books show, my mind went back to some of the earlier Lunch with Books series that I was fortunate enough to get to see in person at the Ohio County Public Library. And I realized that the parts I liked most were actually the parts that I could relate to. When the speaker talked about something that I could wrap my hands around. So that's sort of what I'm hoping to do today. And I want to start by going all the way back to fourth grade. So I was raised in Wheeling, West Virginia, South Wheeling actually, and I went to school at Ritchie. And when I was in fourth grade, I had a teacher named Mrs. Short. She was our reading teacher. In that year, she had us read 4 books. And those 4 books changed my life. Those books were My Side of the Mountain, Flight of the Monarchs, Misty of Chincoteague, and Charlotte's Web. Well, My Side of the Mountain so impressed me, and I wanted to live the lifestyle of that book so much that I actually did. So the story in My Side of the Mountain is a little boy runs away from all the trappings of city life, and he goes up onto the side of a mountain, and that's where he lives all by himself. I loved that story, and all through my childhood and early adult life, I craved that. Now, today, my wife and I, for more than the past 20 years, have lived on our own side of the mountain, pretty much away from all the trappings of society, and we live that lifestyle. Then there's the other books, Flight of the Monarchs. What a wonderful story. It tells about the life of the monarch going from a little caterpillar to forming its chrysalis and then metamorphosizing into a beautiful butterfly on which frail little wings it flies south from North America to Central America for a migration. And it was just an absolutely amazing story to me that something so small could have such a big life. And it made me start thinking maybe I could have a big life. But I think the best part of Flight of the Monarchs from Mrs. Short's class was when we finished that book. My friends and I went home from school, and I was what we called a walker. We had walkers and we had bus students. Bus students, of course, rode a school bus. And us walkers, well, we walked to school and we walked home. And about the time we finished Flight of the Monarchs, my fellow walkers and I left school, and as soon as we got outside of Ritchie, we looked up, and the sky was absolutely full of monarch butterflies migrating, flying south. It was so full that you couldn't put your hands into the sky without being within touching distance of a monarch butterfly. There were hundreds, thousands, maybe tens of thousands of butterflies flying south. I have no idea what caused them to come to Wood Street in South Wheeling that particular year, but I can tell you that it was so magical. It made me think that what we were reading in Mrs. Short's reading class was so very real. There was also Misty of Chincoteague. Misty of Chincoteague teaches us the difference between wild animals and domestic animals and the fine line that can exist between the two of them. I was so impressed with that book that my wife and I over the years have visited Assateague and Chincoteague many times. We've camped there. We've been with the wild horses and the wild deer, and it was just life-altering. And then there's the fourth book, Charlotte's Web. Well, Charlotte's Web taught us all about friendship. It taught us about life. It taught us about love. And it taught us about death. I don't think there's ever been a book in my life book. Take the time to read it. Maybe read all four of those. So those four books, since this is Lunch with Books, those four books actually altered my future. But there was one other book. Came about a couple years later when I was 12 years old. And my sister Janie, for Christmas, bought me my very first Foxfire book. And those of you who are my age or thereabout, you remember the Foxfire book series in the Foxfire movement. This happens to be Foxfire 6. There were, I believe, 11 Foxfire books. Now, Foxfire started as, well, the way it started was there was a teacher in rural Appalachia in Georgia, and he was trying to get his students motivated, and he was having a tough time getting them motivated. So what he did was he asked his students to go home and interview their moms, their dads, their aunts, their uncles, their grandparents, and just interview them about daily life, and from there, write the story. It was such a success, and the students got so motivated that this teacher ended up putting it together into the school magazine, which got picked up by a publisher, which became a for sale magazine. Eventually, there were so many articles, so many magazines, they put them together into a book. I believe it was 1972, and that book was the Foxfire collection. Then there was need for Foxfire 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up. Now, what I loved about Foxfire books was that Foxfire was written by kids who weren't much older than me. And they were written about people who were not that very much different than me. See, growing up in South Wheeling, though I was in town, I was in Appalachia. I had a hill on one side and the river on the other side. I was in the Ohio River Valley. I think I was in my 30s before I started regularly seeing a sunrise because I was right up against that hill. And though we lived in town, it was a time where there were still enough people living in the old ways. And by the old ways, the simpler ways, what I mean is they were living in such a way that they still raised their own food as much as they could. A lot of these folks came through the Depression. So they had these wonderful gardens. They pickled cabbage, or they made cabbage. They fermented things. They pickled things. They made their own beer. They made their own ketchup. And I got to see this on a regular basis. And then along comes a book. Now, to me, you gotta understand, we live in a different society today. Kids have cell phones that have everything in the world available to them information-wise. But for me, when I was a kid, a book, the gift of a book, was the gift of knowledge. It was something incredible because this was very formal. This was adult. And here was an adult piece of education that I could learn from, that told me things about the people I grew up with. Now, I realize that we're living in different times, and I just want to point out, jump back to what I'm calling this episode of Lunch with Books, The Simple Life, a Foxfire Christmas. Right now, it's Christmas time, and Foxfire has obviously had a very strong impact on my life, but I live by a philosophy that I call the simple life, and I think it probably started for me with the Foxfire series. And I would like to explain that philosophy, that simple life, and tell you quickly what it's about. For me, it is simply about living a life where you appreciate what you have. It's really that easy, where you make the most from everything you have. And when my wife and I first got married, we were like everyone else. We struggled to keep up with the Joneses, and we would, on a regular basis, work all day, 5 days a week, so that on the weekend we could go shopping and we could spend our hard-earned money buying stuff that we didn't really want, stuff that we didn't really need, but stuff that other people had and we thought we needed to have. At a certain point in our lives, my wife and I learned that stuff wasn't making us happy. And we learned that we wanted a simpler life. We moved to our farm a couple decades ago, and we discovered that the way we used to go and shop on the weekends, we discovered that was actually from a much more primal instinct. That's something that goes way, way back. And we decided that was part of the hunter-gatherer instinct that people have. We would make our money, we would go out, we would hunt and gather stuff. We would hunt for bargains and we would buy stuff. Well, now we still have that strong urge to be hunter-gatherers, but now when we go out and we hunt, we're hunting for wild mushrooms or plants we could eat or things that we can use in our daily life. And we're gathering these things. So we're still hunter-gatherers. Now, I want to talk to you about something that is related to the simple life, related to Foxfire, but also relates to you. Now, this being the holiday season, the week of Christmas, we're aware that because of COVID, many of us are not going to get to go and have the Christmas that we're accustomed to. We're not going to get to go and be surrounded by all our friends and family. We're not going to be in this big group, and we're not going to have the 18-pound turkey or the 18-pound ham. And that's causing a lot of stress for a lot of people. A lot of people are depressed right now because they don't know what they're going to do. And I want to tell you, based on my life in the simple life, I can assure you we're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. But I want to help as much as I can bring the simple life or a Foxfire tradition to everybody in a way that can help us get through this holiday season. And to do that, I want to use a prop. I want to use an apple. The mighty apple. Probably one of the first crafts we made as kids were applehead dolls. For me, I made applehead shrunken heads. But applehead dolls were probably one of the first things we did. You carve into the apple, you let it dry, and it looks like a shrunken head or a doll baby head. Well, an apple is also a wonderful thing to eat. We all know you can just eat apples. But I want to give you a little recipe that my wife gave me 40 years ago, and we eat it all the time. And my hope is that you realize this little apple can make a wonderful dish that can change how you feel about yourself. You see, part of the simple life for me is about accomplishing things. I want to do something every day. I want to accomplish something every day. So I make a lot of things, and I build a lot of things, and I write poems and stories, and I do something so that every day I accomplish something. And people often ask me, where do you get the time to do that? Well, I have the same numbers on my clock that you have on yours. We all have the same amount of time. It's what we do with that time. And I don't want to make it out that I'm anything special, because I'm not. But when I say that I want to accomplish something every day, that changes everything. Because in order to accomplish something every day, you have to do something every day. Now, accomplishments come in all shapes and sizes. It can be, I built a table today, or I made this garment today, or it can be, I made a decision today. That decision just might be to stay in your PJs all day, to stay in bed for an extra hour, and to just take it easy for one day. That may be your decision. Realize that's an accomplishment. But also, I want you to know that you can take an apple and you can make a dish, a very special dish, and that dish, making that dish, is an accomplishment. My hope is that what I show you with this apple becomes not only something you do because you watched on the show, but my hope is that it becomes part of your regular life, and that it becomes part of your holiday tradition and your family's holiday tradition. So I'm going to take this apple. I have an apple. I have a little bit of butter. I have 2 apples, a little bit of butter. And in this, I put a little bit of sugar and cinnamon. And I'm going to prepare all this so that when we come back, I'll start cooking this and we'll see how it works. But right now, I have a very special treat for you. And it is live music from my friends, Faire. Wasn't that absolutely wonderful? One of the best parts of the simple life is understanding how there is nothing in the world quite like live music. And these guys are absolutely wonderful. They're from right here in the Ohio Valley. While they were singing, I gathered some stuff and I cut up some apples. And I want to show you how we're going to take care of that apple and get it ready for a wonderful treat. But I'd like to start by showing you that my knife that I use. Now, this knife is actually an old Hinkle knife that my wife and I got 40 years ago when we first got married. Somewhere along the line, the handle broke. Most people would throw the knife away and get another knife. I didn't want to do that. I don't like to throw things away. I don't like to waste things. And I found one day while I was walking in the hayfield, I found 2 deer antlers. Now, they happened to be the matching pair, side by side. They were found within about 10 yards of one another. But instead of it being perfect, both of these ended up getting hit with the cutter or the rake or something from when they were doing hay in the field. And they were damaged. And even at that, I didn't want to just throw it away. So I brought the antler home. The other antler I used to make my handle for my knife. And this one I recently, for this show, ended up cutting tips of this off so that I could use them on something that I'm going to show you in a little bit. No animal died for this to happen. That's a natural shed. So I took one of these apples and I cut it up and I cut it into small pieces. The reason I cut it into small pieces is because I want it to cook quickly. Now I have here an old iron skillet made in USA, and right beside me I have a butane burner, and I'm going to put this on a medium heat. Put my skillet on there, and I'm going to start by taking a little bit of butter. Now I have here about 2 tablespoons of butter, and I'm just going to open this up and I'm going to drop the butter in. While that butter melts, I'm going to show you what I'm going to use to stir the butter. I have here a magic wand. Actually, this is a stirring stick. I call it a spatula. This is the first cooking utensil I ever made. I made this over 20 years ago. This is the very first one I made. I made it out of a piece of cherry wood, and I made this by shaping it roughly with an axe, a hand axe, drawing it down with a draw knife, and then sanding it with sandpaper. Sanding. I have used this almost every day for 20 years to cook my meals, and it's basically just a stick that you use to stir with. I'm going to turn that down just a little bit. And while that's melting, the reason I called this a magic wand earlier is because I think this stick holds a lot of magic. And I'm telling you that because when you understand that I've cooked every meal with this for the past 20 years, and I cook most of my own meals, I can pick this stick up and it has the magic ability to, at any time, bring back to mind any number of memories. Because for the last 20 plus years, I've cooked every anniversary dinner with this, every holiday dinner with this. I've scrambled a lot of eggs with this. And would normally forget. Now I'm going to toss my apples in here. You might be able to hear it sizzle a little. I'm going to stir those apples. And then once they're cooked a little bit in this butter, I'm going to add some sugar and some cinnamon. Now, you don't need to add sugar. You can do this just by cooking them with butter. I use butter because it tastes really good. You can cook them in oil if you want to. But I'm going to add the sugar because, not to sweeten the apples, because I want to caramelize the apples. So I'm going to set this stuff aside for now, and I want to go a different direction. I told you that in the simple life, I like to waste nothing and build everything myself if I can, and I like to accomplish things. Well, one of the great things about the Foxfire book was, or the Foxfire series, was in that book, they taught us how to do so many things. In the Foxfire book, you can learn how to make anything from a still to a wagon wheel. And everything in between. You can learn how to make toys. You can learn how to make furniture. Everything is in the Foxfire book that you can imagine. Even how to identify plants that are medicinal or plants that are edible. If you've never looked at a Foxfire book, you want to go out and get the entire series. So I'm going to start by telling you that in Foxfire, one of the absolute first things I saw and fell in love with was a thing called a door knocker, and it was a woodpecker door knocker. But before I do that, I have to back up a whole bunch. Maybe 35 years ago, I was introduced to a woman that I ended up doing a lot of business with over the years. My wife and I have called her friend for many, many years. I'm not going to name her, though. When I start telling you a little bit more, many of you are going to know who I'm talking about. But I was talking to this woman one day, and I somehow told her about my attraction to the Foxfire series. And she responded very well. So every time I would see her, I would mention something to her about Foxfire. And years went by, and one day she said, Don, you do realize Elliot is my brother. And I didn't know who Elliot was. And so I asked her, I said, no, I don't know what you're talking about. And she said, Elliot Wigginton, the editor of Foxfire series, the man behind every single Foxfire. You realize he was my brother, is my brother, and that he lived in Wheeling. I had no idea. This man whose work I had admired my entire life lived in Wheeling, West Virginia. And long story short, which is tough for me to do, over the years we talked about Foxfire every single time we got together. And one day not too long ago, she said to me that she and her husband were wanting to downsize, and that every year for Christmas, her brother sent her things from the Foxfire collection, sent her things that were made by the people who are in the Foxfire book. Not only sent her things that were made by these people, but sent her things that were actually photographed, written about, and are in the Foxfire books. And one of those things, I guess I cut myself short there, she told me that she had always thought that one day she would send all these things possibly to the Foxfire Museum in Georgia. But after having talked to me for 20, 30 plus years about Foxfire, she decided that she was going to gift that all to me. And I can promise you that these wonderful, wonderful items from the Foxfire will not just stay in my own private collection. They will always be here in the Mount Pleasant Historical Society's collection. But one of the things I fell in love with right off the bat was a door knocker. And this door knocker was made by a guy in rural Appalachia who made all kinds of these. And I told you, I like to make things without wasting anything. Well, that is a Foxfire tradition. That's part of it. If you look, you can see this has many layers of paint. Didn't even peel the paint off of it. This is a scrap piece of wood. These come in all shapes, all sizes. The bird he cut out, crudely, roughly sanded. The gouge for the string is just a crude gouge. None of this was done as high art. This was done as folk art. And they would have sold these items to make extra money. They would have used these as gifts. And even the chain, just a piece of string. Well, when I was asked to do this and I decided that I wanted to talk to you about the simple life and Foxfire, I thought, well, I'm going to show some of the items I have from Foxfire. And then one day I was splitting firewood because that's what I do. I gather firewood from my woods. I cut it, I split it, I burn it in my house in a wood furnace. And that's how we heat our house in the winter. And while I was splitting wood one day, I noticed that a piece of the wood that I just split, as I was splitting some kindling, I thought, I could make the back of one of those door knockers out of that piece of split wood. I'm going to dump my sugar and cinnamon in here. We're getting close already. Oh, I don't know if you can see that, but that is just absolutely gorgeous. And I think I brought a little too much, so I'm just going to set that aside. Oh, this is beautiful. I wish I could share this with all of you, but I'm not going to. Almost done, guys. I'm going to turn that down just a little bit more. At home, I cook on electric. Here, I'm cooking on gas, and it is a lot faster. So anyhow, I had that piece of split wood, and I thought, I'm going to make something out of it. I want to show you, I brought a couple things here. This is just a piece of cherry, and from this was part of a log. I cut the log, and I was splitting it, and I decided that I could take a tool other than my axe, and I could split this into smaller pieces. The tool I took is this tool right here. It's known as a froe. What a froe is used for, ideally, was making wooden shingles for roofs. You put this on top of a log and you hit it with a mallet and you split whatever size pieces you want. When I needed a mallet, I didn't have what I needed, so I went and I made one. This is actually a branch from a American red mulberry tree that for the last 25 years has given just wonderful mulberries every year. But this year during a windstorm, it split in half. And rather than just let it go to waste, I decided to use it. So I made this wonderful mallet. So I took this piece of wood, this very piece of wood, I put my froe on top of it. I took the mallet and I split it into pieces. Now, I'm telling you that because I want to show you how from that one little piece of wood, you can see these all fit together, I got 4 pieces of wood. And from these 4 pieces of wood, I ended up splitting a lot more. I'm going to shut this off. I started splitting a bunch of it. And from those split pieces of wood, I started making door knockers. Now, before I get to the door knockers, I'm going to jump a different direction yet. I jump around all the time. My cooking utensil, as I was splitting this wood, I came across another piece that I split. And when I looked at it, I thought to myself, well, that doesn't look, because the way it's shaped, it doesn't look like it's really going to work as well for door knockers. But I split this piece of wood. I drew the shape of a cooking spatula, like a cake spatula or something. I took a coping saw and I cut in on the 2 sides where I drew it so that I would have the shape of my spatula. Then I wanted to take my froe and split it. But my froe is a little bit too big to do delicate work like this. So I took this old butcher knife. I put this old butcher knife where I wanted it to be, and I had to hit it. I didn't want to use that big, heavy mallet, so I used this little mallet. Now, I know I'm starting to get a little bit ridiculous, but I needed wooden mallets for another job I was doing. I didn't have them. I didn't want to go and buy them, so I made my own mallets. I took my wooden mallet that I made this summer. I took an old butcher knife that I got from a flea market. I split this, and what I ended up with was this shape. Doesn't look much like a cooking spatula, but what I will do from here is I will take a wood rasp and I'll start rasping that off. And once I get it to the shape I want, I'll take sandpaper and I'll start sanding it. And eventually this will turn into one of these. This spatula, the first one I ever made, piece of cherry wood. This spatula, which I also use, I made from a maple branch. And these cooking spatulas I made from a piece of locust wood that I happened to split. Now this one is cherry, so it will be a cherry spatula. Anyhow, jumping back to the door knocker, I came up with a back out of a piece of wood that I split. I was happy with that, but I needed to cut out the bird, and I was going to cut the bird out of a piece of pine that I had, but I thought, you know what? Here's a piece, pretty flat, pretty thin, that I just split. Why don't I cut the woodpecker out of that? So for my pattern for the woodpecker, I used my woodpecker door knocker from Foxfire. I made my pattern, I cut it out, and I'm pleased to show you the very first Simple Life door knocker I ever made myself out of a piece of split firewood, something most people would throw away. Out of another piece of split firewood, I cut and sanded, shaped the bird. I took it to my wife, Angela, and I asked her to paint it for me. She painted it for me. I got a piece of string. I gouged out the back. I told my wife I need something great as a pull. She said, what about that old bucket handle down in the basement I almost threw away the other day? I made my first door knocker. So it's not quite the same as what you see in Foxfire, but it's based off the same thing. So from what I saw as a 12-year-old boy in Foxfire, here I am 40 plus years later, I ended up making my own. And I enjoyed doing it so much, I kept making them. And the reason I tell you that is because here's another one I made. My wife painted this one a little bit more fanciful. It has, instead of it being an actual woodpecker, she painted fancy designs on it. This is a piece of scrap wood I had. You can see it was actually pecked out by a real woodpecker. Piece of broom handle. I made another door knocker. And the reason I'm showing you this one is because this particular door knocker, if you like, comment below for Lunch with Books on this Facebook page, we're going to enter your name, and somebody from the library will draw, and somebody's going to win this very door knocker made from scrap wood in the Foxfire tradition. Now, I tell you all this because what I'm trying to get at is we can have a wonderful time with just the things around us. I'm going to take this just a little bit further, and then we're going to listen to another song. I'm going to set this all aside, and I'm going to tell you that I had a hunk of wood, and my wife said, I need a finial for the bottom of the steps for the newel post in our log house. We're in Mount Pleasant, Ohio, and just about a city block away from here is a 2-story 1806 log house that my wife and I own. Now, we bought this house a number of years ago because somebody told us it was a log house. We started tearing into it. We found that it was a log house, and we've been spending the last 4 or 5 years rebuilding it. And when my wife said she needed a crow finial, I looked at this piece of wood and I thought, there's a crow in there. So I cut it out. My wife painted it. This will go on a post like that, and it will become the newel post. Also, when I look in pieces of wood, I see other things. This is a very interesting piece of wood. I'm going to tell you this story in a minute, but I do want us all to listen to another song. I also want to dig into these apples. So I'm going to take this, and I'm going to scrape this all together, and I'm going to put some of these apples in a bowl and let them cool. And while I'm letting this cool so I can eat it, I would like for you once again to listen to my friends from Faire. Faire. Aren't they absolutely wonderful? You know what else is wonderful? These apples, the butter, the caramelized sugar. I wish I could share this with you, but you know what? I'll be fine just eating them all myself. Forgive me for being quite a slob. Absolutely wonderful. We were talking about the simple life. and we were talking about Foxfire. And before we went away to watch this wonderful musical group, the Faire, known as Faire, I said that I like to look to see what all I can find in a piece of wood. In Foxfire 6, on page 2004-2005, there's a wonderful article in here about a guy named Harry Brown who made furniture, Appalachian furniture, for children. And in addition, on page 205, there's a story about a guy named Stanley Hicks and another guy, Willard Watson, who made the same toy furniture, except it was made for dolls, for little girls' dolls at the time. And if you look at this, and I'll show you a close-up of that. If you look at that design and you look at the furniture that's on there, you will see that this is the actual rocking chair from that. And if you were to look at these pieces of wood, you'll see that these pieces of wood that made this chair, they were not cut on a bandsaw or a scroll saw. They were cut by hand. They were shaped and whittled with a knife. They were whittled to fit together, and they're put together with pegs. Absolutely amazing. Part of the Foxfire series. Now, I have never yet gone quite so far as to make furniture out of the Foxfire book. But something that I saw when I was getting ready for this show that I really thought was kind of cool, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to try it, is on page Foxfire 6, page 219. It is by a guy named Dave Pickett. He made what he called a furniture puzzle. Here's a picture right here of the puzzle in use. Here's a picture of the diagram, or the diagram of how he did it. So I wanted to do that. I wanted to do that same thing. I thought I'd like to give it a try. So I took a piece of wood. Now this piece of wood came locally from a guy named Doug Zare. He has a logging lumber company. He cuts lumber out of logs, and I buy all my wood from him. So if you were to come and take a look at my log house, you'll see the siding that goes around the additions. That's all pine rough cut siding that I got from Doug. So this was cut out of this piece of wood. And then, following the instructions in Foxfire, the first thing I did was I cut the center out. And by cutting the center out, it's a puzzle. It opens one way. I, of course, just opened it the opposite way. But this is live TV, so what am I going to do? I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm just going to pull it apart. There is the first table. The next thing you do is you cut that table into two chairs. Once you have the chairs, you cut out a piece here that makes two more chairs. All happens so much smoother back in practice. And then when you cut this out, you have another table. So here's my table. Here's a chair. Move the apple. Here's another table. Here's two chairs. Here's another chair. So we have two chairs for that, another table, and two more chairs. Now, all this came out of one little section of wood that I cut out of this piece of 2-inch rough cut pine. You can see I can cut a whole bunch of these out of this. Didn't take a lot of work, a lot of effort to cut it out. Most of the time, most of the effort was spent in sanding. The same as these cooking utensils. Most of the time is spent sanding them. And for me, sanding is very cathartic, and I like to sand. And I like it for several reasons. It gives you the same physical relief of stress, or from stress, that you would get from possibly petting a dog or a cat, in my case, petting a goat or a donkey. But you sand over and over and over, and as you sand, stress and worry goes away. So you can pay a lot of money for therapy or a lot of money for drugs, and I'm not knocking any of that, or you can just sand and sand and sand. And by doing that, you're changing something. You're shaping an object, shaping a piece of wood, and in so many ways, you're shaping your life. And while you're shaping your life, you're also shaping the world around you. Now, that was the same with this. A lot of time was spent sanding these. It's a great toy. Just like so much of life, you take it apart, you got to put it back together. It's a puzzle. It takes effort to put it back together. Great, great, great to keep the mind fresh. And I'm going to jump all the way back to the apple that we started with. I showed you, I'm going to take another bite. I showed you that one little apple can be turned into a wonderful dish that you can make today for yourself. It can also become part of your holiday Christmas tradition. And by making something like that yourself, or something like this yourself, or any of these things, making it for yourself, you feel such a great sense of accomplishment. So I hope you've enjoyed this. I've showed you things from the Foxfire series and from my simple life. And I want to tell you one more thing about my simple life beliefs and traditions. And that also comes from Foxfire. And that is the beauty of the art of storytelling. Now, anybody who knows me knows I'm a storyteller, and I love to tell stories. But most people will say that they don't think they're storytellers. And I say, that's a load of crap. We're all storytellers. Who among us, as a child, coming home from school with a note from our teacher to deliver to our parents, didn't concoct a story on the way home, whether we were walkers or rode a bus, of our own version of reality, so that when we gave this note to our parents, we could tell the real story from our perspective, so we didn't get a whooping or yelled at or grounded or whatever it is? Who among us haven't gone home to our spouse after coming home late or failing to clean up the garage or get the dishes clean or whatever it was we had to do? Who hasn't concocted a story to tell our spouse? We're all storytellers. Now, I want to jump all the way back to when I was not in fourth grade, but when I was 4 years old. It's the first story I remember that was told to me, and I remember it very clearly. I was watching TV, 4 years old, watching TV with my mom and my sister, and they were watching something I didn't want to watch, and I got so angry, and I wanted them to change the channel, and they wouldn't. And so I stormed out of the room, and I went into my bedroom that I shared with my sister. She's a couple years older than me. I'm 4 years old. I sit down on the floor beside my bed. I bring my dog over. I'm crying, and I'm telling my dog how mean my mother is, how she always sides with my sister, how unfair life is. And I told my dog that I was going to run away up onto the hill. Remember, I lived at the bottom of the hill, between the hill and the river. I was going to run away and live on the hill for the rest of my life and not have to deal with any of this crap. Just about then, my mother walks into the room, and she says, "Don't forget to take a flashlight." She continues walking. I said, what do you mean, remember to take a flashlight? She says, "You're going to want to take a flashlight with you." And I said, "Why?" She said, "Well, for the wolves." And I said, "Well, what wolves?" And she said, "The wolves, silly, the wolves that live up on the hill. You know, the wolves that eat little boys who run away. They're afraid of a flashlight. You're going to have to keep that flashlight on all night long, or those wolves are going to eat you." I didn't run away. I changed my mind. Years later, maybe 30 years later, or close to it, my father had passed away. I'm talking to my mother one evening at her house, and I said, "Mom, one of my earliest memories from you is this story you told me about how I needed to get a flashlight because I was going to run away to live on the hill, and I was going to have the flashlight." And she goes, "Oh, for the wolves." I said, "Oh, yeah, you remember that?" She goes, "Oh, of course I do. It was one of my better ones." I said, "What do you mean one of your better ones? One of your better what?" And she said, "One of my better stories." I said, I'm not following. And she says, "Don't you remember when you and your sister were little and I wanted to get you to do something, or I didn't want you to do something, I would tell you a story. And that story is what kept you from doing something or caused you to do something. I'd overheard you telling the dog you were going to run away and live on the hill. So I thought I'd tell you a story that would scare you so that you didn't run away." And it worked. I never had to worry about you running away. I said, "Well, where did the wolves come from?" And she said, "Oh, when you were little, I would read you the Three Little Pigs. And when we get to the part about the big bad wolf, you get so scared. I knew all I had to do is tell you there were wolves on the hill. You wouldn't want to go again." I said, "Okay, that's," part of me's a little torn here. I'm thinking, so my mother manipulated me with stories, but at the same time, I never ran away. And she said, the flashlight, the reason she mentioned the flashlight was because if she mentioned the flashlight, she knew that I would remember it forever. And I asked her how that worked, and she says, "Well, when you're telling a good story, you want to use something, you want to give them something visual that they're always going to be able to relate to. And for you, it was the flashlight because you were fascinated with the flashlight. And if we handed it to you, you turned it on all the time, and you acted like it was some kind of a sword. You love flashlights. You were afraid of the wolves, so I told you that story." So think about your story. What is your story? Put together a story. The reason I say this is because during the early stages of COVID, when we were in our first lockdown, looks like we're probably going into another one. When we were in that lockdown, I started sharing my stories, my poems, and my short stories and my songs with people on Facebook. And I found a lot of people just wanted a diversion. You too have a story. We all have stories, and your story could change someone's life. So people have asked me, Don, is there anything you can't do? Yes, there are plenty of things I can't do, but there's not much that I won't try to do. Now, there's one thing that I won't try to do in public, and that is sing, because I don't have the ability to sing all that wonderfully. But I will try anything, and whether I'm excellent at it or just okay, this is not an excellent cooking utensil, but it's okay, and it's mine, and I've used it for a big chunk of my life. But when it comes to singing, I'll leave that to the experts. So we have one more very special song for you. Ladies and gentlemen, Jerry L. Henthorn with Faire. Everybody, thank you for watching Ohio County Public Library's Lunch with Books. And from my friends of Faire and myself, you have a nice holiday.
1, 2, 3.
Wow.
Hey, everybody.
Don
Thank you so
Feenerty.
much. Sean, Library, thanks for letting us do this. Thank everybody for watching. I do want to say a couple things real quick, Sean. I'd like to thank my wife, Angela, who shot all this on her iPhone and did all the editing. I'd like to thank Faire, and I'd like to thank my employers here at Unified Bank who let me have a little bit of time off to do this. I also want to jump in real quick before any questions come. Remember, we talked about that split piece of wood, and I said that I took it and I cut a shape out and I split the edges off and I roughed it out, and then I made a cooking utensil. This is what it ended up looking like. So wanted to show you that because you don't get to see that in the video. And also I'm very excited about whoever is going to win this.
Yeah, they kept me busy because I have about 50 or so entries in the drawing. I'm not.
Let's just give 50 of them away.
Okay, you have to make 50. I just want to say, first of all, I've done, I don't know, 800 lunch with books, 1,000 programs overall.
Oh,
That
wonderful.
is one of the best we've had.
Well, good.
Whether
I'm glad.
live in person or live stream. That was fantastic. Thank you, Don.
It's all because I'm so jealous of David Javersack, who hired me and gave me a job years ago teaching at West Liberty. So what a great speaker David Javersack is.
True. And you're the new Javersack? Is that
I always wanted to be David Javersack. But my hair's getting lighter.
Thank you to Faire May as well. That was beautiful. Jerry, I know you're out there. Excellent job. So I just wanted to, so we're going to have a few questions. If my assistant can help me throw a couple up on the screen, if she's listening.
Every time Jerry L sings sings Ave Maria, I've heard her do it 3 times. My eyes get all watery, so I might not be able to read the question.
It was amazing.
Look, if a question doesn't come up, I'm going to ask one myself. I can't allow dead air time.
Here's one. You see it?
Yeah, pull string. I bought, some of you remember me from 1,000 years ago. I was the kid that worked at Kirk's in the frame shop. And when you would buy a frame, you'd come in and I'd wrap it up for you in paper. And Mrs. Kirk had a special way of tying knots. And we had this big bolt of string. And the whole time I was there, we used so little of that string. So when I first got married, almost 40 years ago, one of the first things I put in my shop was a big bolt of that string. I still have most of it left. I just took regular old string, 2 strands of it, nothing fancy. It's just string. Now, do I make my own string? I do. I make my own cordage, usually out of dog bane. I've made it out of pawpaw trees. I make it out of all kind of wild fibers, but it usually takes so much effort to make. I just make it and have it. I hate to use it because I just like to have a big pile of that special string that I made. I'm weird about keeping things.
Lots of compliments. There's a question from my cousin Michelle.
I make whatever tool I think I can make. Also, if a tool breaks, my wife's probably watching this. I don't want her to hear this. So Angela, quit listening. She had a garden tool that broke. And so for Christmas, I'm making her a new handle for that. I love to repair old things. I love to keep things going, but no, I am a tool junkie. I buy new tools all the time and I can't help it. So both, a little bit of both. I make my own tools and I definitely buy tools and I love old tools. I was fortunate that when my dad passed away, he had a very nice collection of all American-made, hand-forged wrenches, screwdrivers, all that stuff. I still have it, so this stuff's probably 80 plus years old.
Are the Simple Life books still in print?
I think that what Della there's asking is Foxfire books. Foxfire books, you can still get them. I believe they're still in print. They printed them over and over and over again. But you can find them on not Facebook, but you can find them on the internet regularly. And they are out there. They are available.
The library has them as well.
The library has them. Beautiful. I'm sorry I didn't go there.
Here you go. Free books at the library. Here's a long question.
You're going to have to read that one for me.
I believe that many of our young families are becoming more interested in the simple life, evidenced by their interest in hiking and spending time outside just enjoying nature. You are offering them an invite to more, making own implements, foraging in the woods for real food, etc. I love the analogy to hunting and gathering. You are so right. So it's more of a compliment for you.
Well, thank you. I'm going to answer it, even though it wasn't a question. One of my friends, Bennett McKinley, years ago saw on Facebook some of the stuff I was doing. And I think it was Christmas time I was butchering geese. And he said, I want to do that. And I thought, you're a city boy. What do you know about butchering a goose? But then I realized I was a city boy. And so I had him come over and he butchered his first goose. Later, he butchered a hog. Later, he's made beer. He's collected pawpaws. The man's addicted. So he's in that millennial age group. And I think I've learned a lot from him and other millennials that they're all about the experience, Sean. They want to enjoy the experience more so than anything else. And so I definitely am not a millennial, and they're much younger than me. And people think I'm young at heart, but really I'm just very immature. So I too am all about that experience. And I do realize that. I do realize that young people are finding enjoyment in some of the things I'm saying, which blows my mind because I never thought it would happen to me, but I'm now the old guy. And I'm feeling very comfortable with that role. And I'm glad that some of them are learning something from me.
Yeah, and we had a question about the donkeys. And I'm going to tell people if they want to see the donkeys, your trailer is up on the Facebook Lunch with Books Facebook page, and they can go see the what are their names again?
Dominic, the Christmas donkey, and Delaney. Dominic and Delaney. And I told my wife last night that I was fearful people who would watch this show today maybe saw the little trailer I did that you asked me to make a trailer for it. And I used the donkeys in the snow. And my fear was people would say, he didn't bring the donkeys. And then I see Susan Haddad there is saying, next time bring the fainting goats. My wife and I wanted to raise goats, and we looked into what kind of goats were good. My wife is a researcher. The internet is an amazing thing. Where did we learn about farming? We learned it all on the internet. She did research and found that fainting goats were a rare breed. Oddly enough, they started in Tennessee fainting goats. They have a myotonic gene. That means when they get startled, they fall over. They don't actually faint, but they fall over. And they were started by a guy named Tinsley. Now, oddly enough, we didn't know this at the time until after we had them, but Tennessee fainting goats that were bred by originally by a guy named Tinsley is actually one of my wife's ancestors. So we have these Tennessee fainting goats. We went that route because they have the least issue with disease, and they are a wonderful goat. They are a meat goat, and we used to butcher them and eat them. But then somewhere along the line, something changed inside me, and I just can't bring myself to do that anymore. So now our goats will live to be as long as goats will live to be, and we don't take part in the butchering of animals or anything of that nature anymore.
Good.
I forgot you're a vegan. I forgot. I'm so sorry. I went there.
Vegetarian. My cousin, I think, is a vegan, and she asked about you being a vegetarian. But anyway, yeah, we know you have donkeys and goats, and what else? You have chickens, probably.
Well, we do. And when we were doing this full time, I started out being part-time retired. I did everything backwards. I was a commercial photographer for 35 years, specializing in marketing and advertising, which meant I made a very comfortable living working on average 2 half days a week. So we had all the time in the world to spend on the farm, and we did that. We had pigs, we had goats, sheep, donkeys, turkey, guineas. I mean, we had so many different types of animals. Then I had this wonderful opportunity to come to work as part of a corporate banking situation with Unified Bank. And I'm loving my new life where now I'm putting 45, 50 hours in at work. And I think of this as my retirement, but it suddenly meant in the winter months, my wife was carrying the water twice a day to the pigs, to the sheep. The pigs knock the water over immediately. You got to carry it back. So we pared down quite a bit. Also, when we quit eating the animals, I'm sorry to go there again. When we quit eating the animals, there wasn't as much of a desire to keep a large herd. So we eventually sold off the sheep, sold off the pigs, and we're down to turkey, chickens, we do eat eggs, and donkey and the goats. That's because goats are what we started with, and it's like a dog. You don't buy a dog for Christmas, Sean. You buy a dog for life. You don't get a cat for the holidays. You get a cat for life. Donkeys are going to live 30 plus years. You gotta be prepared for that. And fainting goats live about 14 years. So those are the animals that have long lives, and they're the ones that are going to stay with us until we die.
Okay.
And then you take care of them.
We're a little over time, so we're going to wrap this up. But first, I just wanted to mention that I had an almost identical experience with monarch butterflies when I was a kid.
Beautiful.
In Warwood, up the river from South Wheeling. And I was all by myself, and the sky was full of them. And I told people, nobody believed me until I met you. And then I said, we're brothers in the monarch, I guess.
I was with you there. Heidi Hartzwiger just wrote, was Heidi Maness. She just wrote and asked what future programming will be. She's one of the people who got me involved in storytelling. So storytelling.
Great. We're going to do this again next year, right?
I hope so. I had a blast. Thanks for asking me. Excellent.
So now we're going to draw. I'm sorry it's in my Steelers hat. They lost last night. So
sorry about that.
Against them. But I have a lot of names in here. So
only one winner.
Here we go.
Rebecca Kellis is jumping in there to win.
Let's see who won. Andrea Allen. One of our
Andrea Allen. This
love
is
Andrea Allen.
this is your woodpecker. I'll
You
send
are
it to you after the holidays.
All right. Don, Faire, thank you. And thank you all the people who attended. Made a lot of comments. I encourage you to go take a look at all the comments and questions we probably didn't even get to. So thank you, everyone. See you next week. Goodbye.
Happy Hanukkah. Merry Christmas.
Happy Hanukkah.